Yeah, so I stayed on. I finished my PhD with Jeff in about 3 years and wanted to finish up some projects. We had made antibodies against the surface immunoglobulin on these B-cell tumors to serve therapeutically. So we treated these mice, which we'd given this lymphoma, with these antibodies against the surface Ig. They're called anti-idiotype antibodies. It cured the mice. I wanted to finish up a few of those experiments and also then look around and decide where I wanted to go for a postdoc. And the two places, and there are three places that I really seriously wanted to go to, was one, it was Sweden, to a guy named Hans Wicksell, who was doing some exciting work at the time. The second one was Lynn Herzenberg at Stanford. And the third was a fellow named Noel Warner, who was in New Mexico, at the University of New Mexico, but also working at the Los Alamos labs. Well, Lynn sent me a rejection letter that my wife subsequently found in his filing cabinet when my wife was working for him many years later. And I didn't hear back from Hans in Sweden. So I thought, well, he just ignored my letter. But then Noel Warner flew me out to New Mexico. I went up to Los Alamos labs and saw they just invented flow cytometry in Los Alamos a few years before that. So I saw this fantastic new technology, appreciated what it could do for me as a cellular immunologist. And Noel offered me a position, which I accepted. The day I accepted it, I got a call from Sweden, from Hans, telling me that he'd like me to come to Sweden. But I'd already given my word to Noel by then that I would join him in New Mexico. So off I went to New Mexico for the next couple of years.
Right. Looking back, if you'd gone to Sweden, might you have had a different kind of career path or not?
Yeah, I'm sure I would have had a very different career path because, going at the time, flow cytometry cell sorters really only existed in about 3 places in the world. Lynn Herzenberg's lab at Stanford, Los Alamos, and I think they had one of the prototypes at the NIH in Washington, D.C. But it was, having access to one of the first flow cytometers in the world that really set the direction of my research. And it also led to, when I was in New Mexico, Becton Dickinson, who had commercialized the cell sorters, wanted to set up a research lab in California to further develop the instrumentation, but also make monoclonal antibodies, which would be used on those machines. When I was a postdoc there, Becton Dickinson recruited my postdoctoral mentor, Noel Warner, to head the new small research lab in Palo Alto. And he offered me a position there as a staff scientist in biotech. So I'm sure if I went to Sweden, I would have never ended up in biotech or California.
And were you going to Becton Dickinson mainly to work on equipment or application of the equipment?
Well, I mainly went to Becton Dickinson to develop antibodies that would be used then on the cell sorter to identify the different types of white blood cells. Because at that time, hybridoma technology had just been invented like 2 or 3 years before that. And today we have 300 or 400 known CD antigens on the surface of white blood cells to say that all these cell types and subtypes and subsets. Well, none of that existed when I was a postdoc in the mid to late 70s. So what Becton Dickinson, my initial charge there was to make antibodies against the human immune system and figure out what they did and if they were going to be useful for diagnostics or potentially therapeutics.
And how far along that road did you get?
Well, I worked at Becton Dickinson for 10 years, and we made a number of the antibodies, and it was really a remarkable time in understanding the composition of the immune system. When I went to BD, we kind of knew there were B and T cells, but we didn't have any really definitive markers. The T cell receptor had not been identified. We knew about surface immunoglobulin on B cells, and that was about it. By the time I left BD, there were a couple of hundred known surface antigens. We developed antibodies against many cell subtypes and differentiation stages. And that was where I first also started working on natural killer cells. And that then has been my career for the last 3 decades.